The goal of this video lecture is to review the concept of personality and discuss one model for describing individuals' personalities. You've probably used the word personality pretty frequently in day-to-day conversation. For example, if I ask you to describe your own personality, you might be able to give me a sense of what you tend to be like. Or if I asked you to describe your best friend's personality, you might describe the characteristics about them that you think are most important for understanding who they are as a person. When we're talking about personality, we're talking about individuals' characteristic, enduring patterns of behavior, cognition, and emotion. So we're talking about characteristics that define an individual and that tend to be stable across time and situations. And we're also talking about characteristics that we can observe across a range of domains. So it affects the way that people interact, the way that they behave, affects the way that they think and perceive the world, and it characterizes their typical emotional state and also their level of emotional reactivity. We can also talk about personality traits, which are elements that comprise a person's personality. These refer to complex patterns of related behaviors, thoughts, and feelings that are stable across time and situations. One important characteristic of personality is that personality varies across individuals. So one way that we can compare people is by comparing their personality traits. So personality traits are going to differ from person to person. Importantly, within individuals, personality traits are stable across time and situation. This doesn't mean that people don't change in different situations. You probably behave differently with your parents than with your friends. You may feel differently or think differently when you're at school compared to when you're in social situations. But in general, individuals tend to vary in systematic ways in terms of their characteristic personality traits and their ways of interacting with the world, even across various situations. So for example, someone who tends to be extroverted and social might be less extroverted and social in a school context compared to in a social context. But when you take two individuals, one who is more extroverted and one who is less extroverted, when you compare them at school and when you compare them with their social groups, the person who is more extroverted is going to be more social and interacting more socially in both of those situations than the individual who is less extroverted. So personality traits differ across individuals, but within individuals we tend to see stable patterns across time and across situations. Importantly, across time occurs throughout an individual's lifespan. So generally, when we're looking at personality traits, we're seeing that these traits tend to be established by late adolescence or early adulthood, and typically we're seeing consistency even from early childhood. So for example, when we look at infant temperament and when we look at children's behavior, we're seeing evidence for the stability of different personality traits even from when individuals are very young that carries through into their adolescent and later adult years. One model that we can use to describe personality is called the 5-factor model of personality. This model of personality breaks down personality into 5 different factors or components and suggests that every individual can be characterized according to their score on each of these 5 components. And these 5 components taken together seem to capture a large part of the information that helps us characterize individuals. So by being able to talk about an individual in terms of where they are on each of these 5 factors, we can give a relatively comprehensive overview of that individual's personality. So the 5 factors that comprise personality according to the 5-factor model sometimes also get called the Big 5, and we can remember these by using the acronym OCEAN, O-C-E-A-N. And these stand for openness to experience, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and negative emotionality, also sometimes referred to as neuroticism. So the first component of the 5-factor model of personality is O, or openness to experience. So individuals who are high on openness to experience tend to be imaginative, they may be unconventional or creative, or at more extreme levels of high openness to experience, this may be an individual who is unrealistic or eccentric. In contrast, individuals who are low on openness to experience may be concrete, they may be rigid or inflexible, they may be dogmatic or applying rules, or they may be uncreative. So these are individuals who are not demonstrating a high level of openness or creativity. The The second component of the five-factor model of personality, the C in Ocean, stands for conscientiousness. So individuals who are high on conscientiousness may be very dependable, they may be very methodological and get a lot done. At extreme levels of conscientiousness, individuals might be perfectionistic or overly cautious. They might be very rigid in how they approach things, and they may take an extremely methodological approach to how they interact with the world. In contrast, individuals who are low on conscientiousness may be low on dependability. So for example, this might be somebody who tends to be late or tends to forget things. They may tend to be disorganized or hedonistic, that they may prioritize pleasurable things rather than things that they need to do or finishing tasks. The third component of the five-factor model of personality is extroversion, and this refers to interactions with other people and warmth in interpersonal interactions. So individuals who are high on extroversion tend to be social and outgoing. They may be forceful. At very high levels of extroversion, they may tend to be reckless or somewhat aggressive. In contrast, individuals who are low on extroversion may be more withdrawn or isolated in their social interactions. And in terms of their affective interactions with others, they may come across as cold or somewhat uncaring. The A in the five-factor model of personality stands for agreeableness. So this has to do with how easy it is to interact with someone and how pleasant it is to interact with someone. So is someone an agreeable individual, or are they more antagonistic to interact with? So individuals who are high on agreeableness are pleasant to interact with. They are agreeable. So they may be honest or giving, they may be empathetic and warm, they may be self-effacing, and at very high levels of agreeableness, they may be self-sacrificing to the point of not meeting their own needs. In contrast, individuals who are low on agreeableness are unpleasant to interact with. So they may be unpleasant or antagonistic, they may be exploitative or aggressive, or they may be paranoid, and that may lead to problems in their interpersonal interactions. And the final component of the five-factor model of personality we can refer to either as negative emotionality. Sometimes this is also referred to as neuroticism. So individuals who are high on neuroticism or negative emotionality tend to experience a high level of negative affect. They may be fearful or angry. They may have a high level of symptoms of depression or anxiety. In terms of their self-esteem, they may have lower self-esteem or feel self-conscious. They may feel somewhat impulsive, and they may also be more emotionally reactive. So rather than being stable emotionally, they may have a high intensity of emotions and have very reactive emotions. So when they experience events, their emotional response tends to be more variable and more intense. In contrast, individuals who are low on negative emotionality or low on neuroticism tend to experience a lower level of negative emotions. They may also just experience a lower level of affective experiences overall and be less reactive in terms of their affective responses to events. So they might be described as cool or even-tempered or restrained, and at extreme levels they may appear to have no emotional response at all when they experience events. So the five-factor model of personality suggests that when we describe an individual in terms of these five components, we get a relatively comprehensive sense of the important elements of that person's emotional, behavioral, cognitive way, their characteristic way of interacting with the world. So when we think about their openness to experience, do they tend to be open or closed to their own experiences and to experiences in the world? When we consider their conscientiousness, do they tend to be high in conscientiousness versus do they tend to be undependable? When we consider their extroversion, do they tend to be highly extroverted and social versus do they tend to be more introverted? When we consider their level of agreeableness, do they tend to be agreeable and warm in their interpersonal interactions, or do they tend to be more antagonistic? And when we consider their negative emotionality or neuroticism, do they tend to be high on the experience of negative emotions? Do they experience a lot of negative emotions at an intense level, and are they very emotionally reactive? Versus do they tend to be more emotionally stable? So do they experience fewer negative emotions? Are their emotions less intense, and are they less reactive in terms of their affective responses to events?